Okay. Hi. Can everybody hear me okay? Well, is that through? Good morning, everybody. Welcome. For those of you I've not met before, my name is Peter. I'm the Collection Development Librarian here in Hingham. And I am very happy to have you all here for my 21st annual Great Books You May Have Missed Talk 2023. Some years this talk is really hard to put together. Some years it kind of falls together really easily, which it did this year, which I'm very happy about. It makes my life a whole lot easier. For anyone new to the talk, my main goal is to find a list of books that are every bit as engaging and memorable as the ones you've all heard about, but for some reason they slipped through the cracks, didn't get the same kind of press or word of mouth. I always try to choose books that cover a wide area of topics, lots of different genres, and I always take a moment to mention it's not a list of my own personal favorites. It's from going over all kinds of best of lists and talking to staff and public, and I buy all the books, so I'm seeing everything, so just keep my eyes and ears open for everything. Of course, there are always a few books that wind in that I am particularly fond of, but if I do love them, I make sure the world at large also love them before I put them in the top. I hope I have a list that many of you have not heard of before, and hopefully lots you haven't read. And I should say also all the books I have are available on Libby as ebooks and e-audiobooks, except for one, which I will mention when I get there. One last thing before I start, just so I can keep from repeating myself, although I'll probably still repeat myself a lot because I tend to do that. The common thread that ties all the books together is the quality of the writing. If a book gets great reviews up and down from all kinds of sources, but when I read it, the first page doesn't even want to turn to the second page, it's not going to make the list. It doesn't mean that those books aren't great, it just means they're not what I'm looking for. Also, when I describe a book, especially a novel, I will likely tell you a little more than appears on the book jacket, because as anyone who's heard me talk before knows that I hate spoiling a book for anybody. There's a great book called Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro that I managed to spoil for myself, which is almost a circus act, many years ago, and I'm still upset about it, so I will do everything in my power not to spoil a book for somebody. I will also never use the word unputdownable, which has become the new catchphrase in reviews that I despise because it's just not a word. I don't like it. And the last thing I will say is that as I get older, literally, I've only had glasses for like 4 years, and it's a steep decline. And so I pride myself on making a lot of eye contact. If I make less, it's because doing this and this is going to make me pass out. So I apologize in advance if I don't look up as much as I usually do. But I don't want to get motion sick, so there we go. Okay. I also want to say that I'm very lucky that one of my best friends in the world is also my boss, and she's in the back, so I'm hoping it will do good. Okay. My first novel today is a debut novel. Some of you may know that I love debut novels. Is the microphone too loud? Or okay? Okay, I'm hearing fine. This is called The Mythmakers by Keziah Weir. Weir is a senior editor at Vanity Fair. Her writing has appeared in all the best places like New York Times and Esquire. And while she grew up in California and British Columbia, she now lives in Maine. This is one of those novels that's about writers, or the act of writing, or more specifically, who gets to tell a person's story. I know I have featured the occasional library-based novel over the years, and I made one or two more today. I can't help myself, they just show up. But there's something about writing about writers. It's not a professional bias. It's a very impactful subject for a good story. The main character here is named Sal Cannon. She's a journalist in her late 20s, I believe. Her career has seen better days, her personal life has seen better days. And then one day she reads a short story by a much older, one of those kind of famous but now kind of forgotten authors named Martin Keller. And the story is in fact about the day that she met Martin many years ago. In the story, which is what makes her so intrigued, Martin becomes a little more smitten with her in the story. And by the end of the story, you realize that this character will think of this girl for the rest of his life. And she, being in the doldrums, is kind of fascinated by this idea, and so starts to look into it, discovers that the story is actually an excerpt from an upcoming novel, which makes her even more curious, and then she realizes that Martin Keller has recently died. So she's fascinated to learn more about this other part of her life, what this means, and she winds up contacting Keller's wife, Moira, who is a theoretical physicist, which may sound random, but the point of theoretical physics is to explain the universe, right? To understand cause and effect. And if you bring it into relationships angles, it's how relationships interact and engage and overlap and absorb. And these things aren't necessarily mentioned specifically, but it's there. She's done this really brilliant job of creating this. You also may know, for me, I like kind of slow pace. I like little slow burns, beautifully paced, quiet little book. And just leads us to a deeper understanding of these people. There's also Moira's daughter, who's amazing. That's a whole other character I wanted to tell you about. As I mentioned earlier, Sal is the main character, but we fairly quickly get chapters featuring the other characters in the story. And this one cool touch that I like is that Sal's chapters are always in the first person, but the chapters about everybody else are in third person omniscient. And third person om is very common, but to have the contrast between the two in a story about perspective and memory and who gets to tell your story, it's just brilliant and very effective. So it's a terrific book, very engaging, nice quiet kind of build that I do love. And I love debut authors again, because this is their first chance to show you what they got, and it's fantastic. And I say this a lot, and I'll probably say this a bunch, that I can't wait to read what she does next, because when you find someone with a slightly new taste, it's always exciting, especially when you read a lot. Oh yeah, okay. Ooh, this one's a trip. This is a reflection, this next book, a reflection of how society at large perceives and processes what it hears and reads and thinks, told in this case through the unique story and viewpoint of a very respected writer and thinker and her typically not as respected doppelganger. And the book is in fact called Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World by Naomi Klein. And aside from the fact that Klein is an award-winning author, as I said, widely respected in several fields, she just writes interesting books. It's very simple. I like books where I learn something I didn't expect to learn. Yes, sir?
Is that Klein or Wolf? You have Naomi Wolf.
Okay, so if I did that, Naomi Klein would actually kill me. That is the best thing I've ever done in 21 years. Okay. Yes, scratch that. As Willy Wonka would say, strike that, reverse it. That should be Klein. I'm going to have to write her an email, actually, and apologize to her. Naomi Klein. I love the fact that I did that, actually. I'm very amused that her book worked. No, not that. That the book kind of worked on me. Like, her premise is correct. Put it that way. Yes, okay. That's really good. All right, so I'm totally thrown off now. Okay, so the scene of this book. That's so funny. Was that Naomi Klein with a K, has spent years and years and years being confused with Naomi Wolf, as we've seen. I swear that was not intentional. I'm literally never going to forget this. Wolf started out as a primarily feminist author, but has written a number of nonfiction books on a number of different topics. But today, Naomi Wolf is mostly known for two things. One, she's become something of a right-wing conspiracy theorist in the last 10 years, after being notably left-wing for several years, which is kind of the twist. But most importantly, her sources and data and research methods have been highly criticized over the years, including in 2019, she had a book pulled from publication because she based the entire premise of her book on some terms that she didn't understand, and the whole thing was flawed. It was a mess for her and the publisher. Naomi Klein, on the other hand, is a widely respected author on socioeconomic issues, been a key voice on climate change and protest movements, among lots of other topics. But the main struggle for Klein is that while she's more of an intellectual, kind of research-based writer and columnist, Wolf has always written things from a very subjective and personal angle, and has also moved, as I said, from a fairly left-wing thinker to a right-wing thinker, and that's not as a critical comment, but most people do not move as far to either side as she has done in a short period of time. And the issue that Klein has with that isn't really her views, but that all those views keep getting misattributed to her, like in a widespread, lifelong kind of way. And then she goes into this debate over whether her problem is that she just hasn't branded herself well enough, whether she hasn't done a good enough job being her Naomi. But that's just the seed of the book. The book is really about the way, or the idea of the way a mirror world is all around us, from, for those people that are on social media, the way people present themselves to be online, the way other people present people to be online, if they even know those people, if they're trying to get some certain point across. It's about the difference between basing an opinion on investigative research or just widely unsupported conspiracy theories. Talks about doppelganger politics, which is this really interesting way one professor described the complex issues between Israel and Palestine in their history. There's just so much to think about and ponder in the book, and it made me want to seek out more books. I usually do, that make me kind of question things and think outside the boxes that I've built for us, because so many of us read books that we kind of know we're already going to agree with. And so it's kind of hard to learn anything really new when you do that. And I just like spending time, even if it's literary time, with someone thinking the big thoughts, because it helps me think the big thoughts. Especially the ones that I kind of think, as we all have, you put a pin in it. Oh, I know this, that's what I think about this, that's what I think about that. And there's obviously constantly opportunities to learn something new or think about something from a new way. And that's what made the book most memorable for me, just the way she made me think about things. So I've read a bunch of her stuff before, I'll always read what she writes, but this one is just particularly compelling, really worth reading. I spend a lot of time organizing how I'm going to talk about these books, but sometimes I still surprise myself. This is a really big change in the books. Almost every year when I'm gathering books, I try to, like I said, I try to find books from lots of different genres. I almost never wind up with enough thrillers, because afterwards someone will always ask me why. I don't know why, it's a problem. But sometimes I don't find one. But this year I have a couple, but this is the first one. As I was going through books, I saw a quote by Douglas Preston, who's one half of a favorite writing team of mine. It's actually on the back of the book. The book in question is called Going Zero by Anthony McCartan. And the review mentioned, quote, "It's wickedly clever setup, it's unassuming librarian protagonist," always a plus, "it's a twisty plot and its surprise ending." I read a few more reviews, knew I found a great thriller, so here it is. It feels kind of like the best kind of Michael Crichton thriller, where it's relevant and topical, and it would clearly make a great 10-episode series for Netflix or something. It's so much fun. The premise is that 10 Americans have been chosen to work with the CIA to test a new type of spyware, basically developed by this young genius named Cy Baxter. And it can theoretically track anyone anywhere in the world. So these people are given 2 hours to disappear or go zero and fall off the grid. If they can stay hidden for 30 days, they get $3 million from Cy Baxter. But if the spyware called Fusion finds all 10 people, then Baxter wins a $90 billion government contract to restage the way American surveillance is done. You can probably already tell where this is going. And everything kind of goes according to plan, except for our favorite character, the intrepid librarian, of course, who's from Boston, mind you, even more of a plus. A Boston librarian makes me happy. Her name is Caitlin Day. The how and why Caitlin is in the group and how she evades them for a little while is part of what makes the story so compelling, so I'm not going to tell you about it. But it is a super smart, fast-paced, exciting thriller, very happily without like a big body count. There are a lot of thrillers nowadays. It's like old era, like Schwarzenegger, Stallone body counts, where people just die, you don't even realize, they just fall out of planes, whatever. And a lot of the books now, these kind of thrillers seem to have that, and this doesn't. It's just kind of a classic. It's almost like a spy book for you could read this one. I also did mention, I usually mention about the author at the top. McCartan is not a novelist, a novice writer. He's 62, from New Zealand. He's written about 10 novels and nonfiction things, lots of plays. He's also written a lot of screenplays that have won or been nominated for just about every award that they have. And you've probably seen something. He wrote the screenplay for The Theory of Everything, about Stephen Hawking, The Darkest Hour, about Churchill and World War II, Bohemian Rhapsody, Two Popes. He's everywhere and really, really good. So he's got a serious pedigree, great writer, definitely in from the first page. Didn't even matter there was a library. I didn't even know there was a librarian until I think page 2, maybe. So, you know. I'm always, it's always fun to read a book that reads kind of like a nice movie works. So this one's just a lot of fun. Okay. Fran already asked me about this one. So some of you may look through the list already and noticed a little book called The Iliad. You're not hallucinating. I really do have the latest translation of Homer's The Iliad on the list, translated by Emily Wilson. Wilson is originally from Oxford, England. She's a PhD in classics and comparative literature from Yale. Currently a professor of classical studies at UPenn, so she's got some cred behind her. She's also translated the Odyssey, as well as works by Sophocles and Seneca and Euripides. Her new translation of the Iliad has been hailed around the world as this remarkable achievement, a really vibrant, dynamic language that somehow, and it's really true, somehow manages to blend the 21st century with the 8th without seeming disrespectful to the 8th. You might be surprised to learn that since the year 2000, there's been 15 major translations of the Iliad alone. Some of them are great. Stephen Mitchell's from about 10, 12 years ago, and Caroline Alexander's from maybe 8 years ago did really, really well. But there is something, and I have read this 3 times, and not this version, but the Iliad in general 3 times. And there is something really special about the translation. If you don't know the story, which if you've ever bought the Iliad or looked at it in the stores, they don't even put a description of certain books on it. It's the Iliad. They're not even going to tell you what it's about. But if you haven't read it or forgot, it's about a period near the end of the Trojan War. It focuses on King Agamemnon and Achilles, his greatest warrior. All kinds of infighting between them, and Helen of Troy, and Paris, and Hector, and gods and goddesses. It's got all that good stuff. But like all great classics, it's about honor and duty and friendship and betrayal and fates decreed by the gods and all of the cool epic stuff. I do not expect you all to run out and read the Iliad. However, I firmly believe, and I think I'm right about this, that books like the Iliad or the Odyssey, or my personal favorite, the Aeneid, are right at the top of our broader culture's great books we made a list. There are things like Don Quixote, In Search of Lost Time. No one's read Proust except me, because I'm obsessed with it. But there's books like that, and Les Miserables, all these books that people know a 2-sentence description of or saw a movie, but haven't actually read the books. So when something comes along that receives praise like this, and I look at it and I agree that it just kind of sings and leaps off the page, I have to tell you about it. So I did. This is also the book that I mentioned is not available as an e-audiobook. It probably will be, because most of the major translations of these kind of things do get made into audio, but I think it just takes longer than a 200-page novel to someone read this properly. So I'm sure it will be out eventually. And they're great. If you've never listened, especially the classics, if you've never read them, try them on audio, because they are, that's how they were presented in the first place. They weren't written down, they were spoken. So they work really, really well on audio. It will take you, especially if you're local, it will take you a long time of little drives back and forth to the store to listen to the audiobook. I understand that. But still, it's worth it. It's worth it.
Quick question.
Listen.
And maybe why is this nonfiction? Is the Iliad nonfiction? How does that happen?
Kind of plays, poetry, classics are considered, yeah. And it is, it is historical. It does, hey, there you are. It's not that bad. It's not that bad, but it's just like looking underwater a little bit.
I can't see you at all.
Okay, good. Oh, great. That's great. You have the best view in the house then. No, any plays, poetry, classics like that are always stage nonfiction. And it is obviously based on, it's historical. But yeah, good question. I like very library-based questions since we have. This next one wins the award for best title of the day. I have to put it down because I can't read the title, it wraps around the book. The title is this, right? Empty Theater, or The Lives of King Ludwig II of Bavaria and Empress Sisi of Austria, Queen of Hungary, cousins, in their pursuit of connection and beauty despite the expectations placed on them because of the exceptional good fortune of their status as beloved national figures. With speculation into the mysterious natures of their deaths. Great time, great. The author, Jack Gems, is one of my favorite authors of the last few years. She wrote this amazing, atmospheric kind of little haunted house novel that I featured a few years ago called The Grip of It in 2017, I think. Gems currently teaches creative writing at UC San Diego. Everything she writes is worth checking out because she just has a unique voice, very entertaining style. As for this book, it's basically an historical, satirical novel about CC and Ludwig, two of the most outrageous examples of extravagance and vanity and privilege that ever lived, which they did. Much of the novel is obviously complete fiction, but Jack says this great thing in the acknowledgments where she says, what do I have it here? Quote, many of the figures written about here are well known for exaggerating and embellishing the facts of their own lives. And so in a way, this book could be seen as a fiction based on mainly personal fictions. And I love the idea that her narrative is just as possible to be true as their actual lives because they live such outrageously exaggerated lives. Anyway, the flow of the book is simply to follow these two through their lives, loves, indiscretions, redirections, all kinds of rigmarole, which is a word that never gets used often enough, by the way. That's your word for the day, rigmarole. It's my favorite. It just falls out of the tongue. It's beautiful. It's an astonishingly good read. She uses lots of short chapters, which always makes me happy. I like short chapters because A, I get a nice place to stop. And B, if someone's making short chapters, it's like I know that they're crafting these little snapshots for me that are going to result in a, they know how to do it. They're not just going to talk forever. It also made me think about how easy it is to abuse privilege and wealth, which I know we all know, but this is a wonderfully bizarre example of it. And also how many people in so many positions throughout history may simply not have been suited to have or to serve those positions or power in history. You feel for a lot of people in the story, not Ludwig and Cece typically, and all the flourishes of Europe in the 1800s, just kind of intoxicating in their own way. Everything's just been kind of handled and formed by Gems into this wonderful tale. Really delightful book, a lot of fun. She's one of my favorites on it, but the book's just a treat. I have at least one biography on the list every year. This year's winner is Lives of the Wives, 5 Literary Marriages by Carmela Chiraru. Chiraru has edited several major poetry anthologies, wrote a great book about 10 years ago called Nom de Plume, A Secret History of Pseudonyms, which was a lot of fun. This one looks at 5 very different marriages, though most of them seem to have been equally contentious, through the experiences of and expectations put upon the wives. We have British theatre critic Kenneth Tynan and his wife Elaine Dundee, whose writing ambitions he greatly encouraged until she became more successful than him. He lost his mind about it. The infamous Roald Dahl, who loved having a beautiful and famous wife in Patricia Neal, until he realized he actually hated the fact that she was far more successful and popular than he was. Kingsley Amis and Elizabeth Jane Howard, who were both writers, but Elizabeth eventually had to leave Kingsley because he had rather sadly predictable expectations for her and her role in the household. Italian writers Alberto Moravia and Elsa Morante, who kind of were a twist on the others in that that was a pair greatly dominated by Elsa, who treated her husband, who adored her, quite horribly. And last, there's the lesbian couple of Una Troubridge and Radcliffe Hall, who were really fascinating because they had several kind of opinions and prejudices that made them a little unique, but they also probably had the most conventional marriage of the bunch. The book opens with this fantastic introduction that talks about the role of wives in general in Western civilization, but also the role of the wife of a writer. And I thought it was a fantastic way to start the book because it told me exactly why I wanted to read it. And also, as someone who owns his livelihood to writers of all genders, I can't help but be fascinated by the dynamics in a relationship where one person has to spend so much time alone and develop this strong sense of self to be able to sit down and face the proverbial typewriter and get this work done. And Chiraru describes the book in the beginning as this kind of clean way. She says, each story explores how women have defined themselves through or in opposition to men. And each reveals the toll of the creative process, not only on writers, but on the partners and children. This is a book about money and fame and how those elements can unite a couple when love does not. It's about the negotiation, it's about power and the negotiation of power. It always feels like a little cop-out to describe a book by using the author's own words, but I really couldn't write it any better, so I just wanted to say it. It's a fascinating book, a little gossipy at times of some terribly interesting, peculiar people. And for anybody that likes to read biographies, it's like you're getting 5 biographies for one, so you can't go wrong. Can't go wrong. Change my little set dressing here. This next one is an amazing read. It's called The Land of Milk and Honey by C. Pam Zhang. A couple of years ago, she wrote a book called How Much of These Hills is Gold that was shortlisted for everything from the Booker Prize to the PEN Award, and I am pretty certain she will win every prize there is before she's done. Heard about this book right after I saw a film called The Menu with Ray Fiennes. I don't know if you've seen it, and if you've seen it, that's a little intense. This is nothing like that, but the thing is, I had just seen the movie, so I had this idea already in my head of food and elite and privilege when I picked it up. And then I started to read this, and her prose is ridiculously good, so I knew I had to talk about it. This one is so kind of beautifully rendered and told that I'm truly going to tell you almost nothing about it, which I always enjoy. The main idea is that, and if I can make Ginny laugh, I'm happy, that's all I gotta do. The main idea is that due to this kind of toxic smog that has formed over the Midwest and spread around the world, food is becoming scarce. And one particular woman, the narrator, was a young chef when this devastation began. And she eventually finds herself working in the kitchen of this very unusual man and his daughter in essentially a country of his own creation after the world kind of starts to fall apart. And in this place, the elite have kind of figured out a way around this culinary devastation that's affecting the rest of the world. The book is her story and what she goes through and what she sees. And I'm really not going to tell you anything else, but it's not like I'm ignoring big, crazy, dramatic things. It is just its own kind of experience, which is really the beauty of the book for me, is that it's this combination of 2 things I adore. First, a brilliantly conceived piece of speculative fiction about a very relevant topic, how climate changes could or are affecting food supplies around the world. And it moves through the story with this unbelievably beautiful poetic language that just makes me crazy. I get very invested in language when someone writes really, really well. Like, I have to stop and walk around and then just get a handle on it. I get obsessive about people that can use words well, and she does. Second, it's also kind of the best kind of foodie writing you can imagine. It's great when this food writing can be so good. And I'm someone that has like 95 food intolerances, so food writing for me is both beautiful and just painful, but it's so good. It's so, so good. Everything is really just deeply sensory, and the way she kind of longs for certain foods in the beginning, and then when she talks about the food she starts to cook later on, it's so, so good. Some moments reminded me of The Scent Keeper by Erica Bauermeister, the book that I was obsessed with several years ago I'm talking about, and that the writing, again, was just so immersed in the senses and so compelling. And again, I said this before, I'll say it again, I can't wait to see what she does next. If you want a unique story that is beautifully written, definitely give this one a try. This next one is the latest from Frida Umbergar. It's called The Museum of Failures. Umbergar, like so many authors today, is a professor of English, in this case at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. She's only written 9 or 10 novels, which always surprises me because I feel like she's been around forever, but I looked at her list and I realized she didn't actually start publishing until she was 40. I just feel like she's been around for a long, long time. She had been a journalist for some, minor newspapers like the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the New York Times. But her novels, The Space Between Us, was very successful a few years ago, and then Honor, which was a Reese Witherspoon book pick out of this past summer, the summer before. It brought her far more attention, but not enough in my opinion, so here we are. This story is about family and forgiveness and secrets and healing and all the stuff that makes up a great novel. So, main character is a man named Remy Wadia, who left India years ago to move to the US. He's doing very nicely for himself, has a good life, has a wonderful marriage, but he and his wife are unable to have children. He decides to travel back to India with the intention of adopting the child of his unmarried cousin. And while he's in Bombay, he also decides to visit his ailing mother, who turns out to be far more sick than he thought. And Remy and his mother have always had a difficult relationship, but seeing her ill is a little too much for him, so he decides to help her get her strength back so she can stay in her home before he leaves. As time moves on, he finds a photograph in her house that makes him question many things about his childhood and his parents. And as she starts to explain what happened, he starts to realize things about himself and his anger towards certain things and his place in the world and kind of the place he wants to create for his own family. Everything between Remy and his mother just feels so real and so honest. And when he reminisces about his childhood, it's just so tender, even in these difficult moments that he's recounting. And the theme of an adult child, realizing the frailties and humanity of their parents is always going to be a loaded topic for a good novelist. You might know there's a singer-songwriter named Loudon Wainwright III, who I've been a huge fan of forever, and he has a song called Your Mother and I that he wrote for one of his daughters when he was leaving her mother. And the line is, and I hope when you grow up one day you'll see your parents are people and that's all we can be. And I kept thinking of that line because that's exactly what the book is about how we reckon with things from the past and all the things we often naively believe to be true and the much more fascinating and often far more simple truths behind everything. And if you haven't read it before, Amrigar always writes so beautifully of India and creates such a wonderful sense of place in all of her novels. You really feel like you can hear and see and smell everything. It's also not overly literary, which means she just kind of tells her story. Some writers really like to show you how fancy they can write, and some people just know how to write and get on with it, and that's this one. Great characters, great sense of place, just a lovely book overall. This next one is a powerhouse of investigative reporting literacy. It's called Cobalt Red: How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives, by Siddharth Kara. Kara is one of those ridiculously smart people that is also an exceptional writer, so basically he just annoys me. He was born in Tennessee, but this is his description. This is his little bio. He is, quote, British Academy Global Professor. I don't even know what that means. It sounds like Commandant or something. It just sounds great. An Associate Professor of Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery at Nottingham University, and a Senior Fellow at the Harvard School of Public Health. So I'm going to trust that you know what he's talking about. Somewhere in your lives you may well have read or heard or seen something about the hazards and consequences of mining, any kind of mining. Physical health risks, child labor, corrupt practices, benefits of green energy over fossil fuel energy. Put them all together, you have this unbelievable story of cobalt mining in the Congo. Cobalt, if you didn't know, and I don't think I knew the scope of it, or appreciated the scope of it, is the essential piece of lithium-ion batteries that are in our phones and laptops and electric cars and all these things. Been touted as this amazing new power supply that's unbelievably convenient. But the cost of mining this stuff is startling. About 75% of the world's cobalt supply comes from the Congo. And it's dug by hand for pennies a day by men, women, and lots of children. It is highly toxic, unregulated, and just out and out dangerous any way you can possibly look at it. Also, just to make matters a little worse, the way, because it's done by hand, the industry actually refers to it as artisanal mining, which is like the most tone-deaf thing I've ever heard in my life. All the companies that are paying for this stuff know about it, and all the rest of us that still buy rechargeable devices and help create the demand for it still do this stuff. And so I think the key, and what Kara believes, is that this isn't going to change that. Our need and use of this stuff is not going to change. So it's essentially that people try and understand at least the scope of the issue, and the things other people put themselves through for things that are really conveniences for us. And I'm not trying to shame anybody. I love my iPhone and my Kindle, and I buy rechargeable batteries. I'm part of this. But some of the stories that he tells and the people he talks about are so powerful and so heartbreaking. And because he's such an exceptional writer, he just pulls you in a way that honestly surprised me. I was surprised how narrative it was. And in the end, it's just a remarkable work that details some pretty horrible things going on in the world for our benefit, and a lot of proof that things could be drastically improved if the powers that be just decided to make it so. But as is the case, when profit and the next big thing come into play, it usually appears only too easy for the powers that be to look the other way. So really, really recommend this book. I read it months ago and I'm still thinking about it all the time. I'm going to make this my global issues moment here for a minute. As the person who buys all the books for the library, the adult collection, I can tell you there are dozens of books published every month on climate change. Very sciencey ones, very political ones, very common sense, here's what you can do ones. Many of them are fascinating, some of them are a bit scary, but the best one I've read in years isn't specifically about climate change, but the effects of one particular issue of climate change, which is fire. This is Fire Weather, a true story from a hotter world by John Vaillant. Vaillant is a Massachusetts native who now lives in Vancouver. His previous works are all also about fascinating but specific events and how they reflect or represent larger issues in the world. This book is based on the 2016 fire in Fort McMurray in Alberta, Canada, which is the hub of Canada's oil industry and our largest supplier, our largest foreign supplier of oil. It was a multi-billion-dollar disaster, driving 88,000 people from their homes. And while Vaillant covers that story in a very engaging and dramatic way, he also takes it in an unexpected place, which is, I thought, the reason it was so great, the book, is that it takes us into basically the heart of fire itself. He talks about the power fire has had in our literal evolution as a species, its importance in civilization, industry, economy, everything. And in an odd piece of coincidence, this book was actually published in the early days of those big Canadian wildfires last summer. So what was originally meant to be a book to document this one particular tragedy and call attention to something that could happen again became this kind of a, see, I told you so kind of a moment. But as much as I love a larger look at the impact of fire as a tool and everything, the story of this fire and the oil industry and the people involved and the means by which they fought the fire is absolutely riveting and page-turning. I was only a chapter or two into it when I stopped to look up John Vaillant because I was like, why have I not read this guy before? He's so good. It turns out he's won a bunch of major Canadian awards. He's been published in New Yorker, The Atlantic, National Geographic, lots of other magazines. He's just a marvelous writer with a strong sense of curiosity, history, and perspective on how everything in our increasingly smaller world is interconnected. And it doesn't matter where you stand on the unfortunately now politicized concept of climate change. It's about the fact that these massive fires are happening. We're dealing with them more and more. They're not going away. And the stories around them are very compelling. And it was very moving. So I think you'd appreciate this one. Okay. I very wittily put these two together only because they have the word fire in the title. This is, I've done these things for 21 years. Anything I can do that will help is great, so that's what I'm doing. Any shortcut I got. This is called Three Fires by Denise Mina. Many of you have probably read Mina before. She's a very successful writer from Scotland. She's written a lot of crime novels and thrillers and comic books too, and plays, all kinds of stuff. She's just very, very good at what she does. This book is her reimagining or retelling of an event from the 15th century and the man at the center of that event. This is also my little book of the year. Again, if you've ever seen it before, I have this almost unexplainable, inexplicable love for little books, like little short stories. They make me very, very happy. But historically, those little books tend to be these beautiful little stories that are very emotional or very heartrending, and I just tear-jerking. I love those. I love to cry at books, deeply, deeply, deeply. This one is not that. This one's kind of a cautionary tale about the original king of cancel culture, Girolamo Savonarola. And if you don't recognize the name, you recognize the event he's most famous for, the Bonfire of Vanities. In Florence, Italy, 1497, after a series of sermons about what he's deemed to be objectionable aspects of society, his supporters gathered thousands of sinful objects and burned them in the town square. He was an incredibly influential man for a very short period of time, only about 3 years. But as a preacher and prophet and attempted reformer of the church, he certainly made a name for himself. And in Mina's telling, became the architect for the kind of toxic atmosphere that frequently permeates culture right now. And that's kind of what makes the book so fun, is that while it is an historical novel, she does insert kind of these contemporary references kind of subtly just to make sure her inferences are clear. It's clearly not a full biography of him or of the period, as it's only 136 pages, but it is a wonderful kind of history turned parable. Very light touch as to how she fleshes out, obviously fictional descriptions. She's writing about someone in the 15th century. She's not, no notes she's working off here. The nimble way that she moves through the years and events of his life, showcasing how the beliefs and values of that age were ridiculous in some ways, and especially when it comes to his inevitable excommunication. It's just a fascinating little page turn of the book, and I think you'll find it very engaging. And you probably definitely want to read more of Yasmina when you're through, because she's just a great, great writer. Oh my gosh. You might have heard Anna and I talking about this one for you. This is really fascinating. I read this back in April of last year, and I knew I had to have it on the talk. This is one of those ones, I've said this before, I feel guilty sometimes. I will read a book early in the year, and my brain actually wants to suppress its popularity so that I can actually talk about it. I've had books that I've loved, and when the time comes, damn it, I can't talk about it because everybody's read it. So this one, I didn't hide it, but unfortunately it kind of stayed quiet. This is Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma by Claire Detterer. It is a far-reaching and intentionally subjective look at the question of how we approach or appreciate or judge the art of men who are known for their terrible behavior, particularly towards women. Detterer has written a few other books. She's an essayist and reporter, regularly contributes to things like the New York Times, The Atlantic, Vogue, and The Nation. Love the clarity of her writing, always have. The first thing I loved about this book, and the reason her other books are so good as well, is that she doesn't write pieces of objective critical history. They're always very personal, subjective takes on, and in this case, a larger cultural subject that has always been worth talking about, but has gotten a kind of boost in the marketplace since like the Me Too era. She opens the book by talking about her love of films of Roman Polanski, even as she's fully aware of his rape charges from the 70s. So she wonders, how am I able to love the art of this man that did something reprehensible? What is the scale that weighs the quality or importance of the art against the behavior of the artist? Is it even possible to quantify that, or is it just something you have to feel? She talks about fairly obvious people like Pablo Picasso, Woody Allen, Hemingway, artists like Miles Davis, which is always a hard one for me. He's my favorite musician of all time. I know he was not good to his wives. There's Michael Jackson, Wagner, some really interesting chapters that I didn't expect on people like Doris Lessing, Joni Mitchell, and Raymond Carver, which are really, really interesting. This brilliant chapter that focuses on Valerie Solanas and Sylvia Plath, both women who create strong responses in feminist studies. Solanas was the kind of self-proclaimed radical feminist that tried to kill Andy Warhol in '68. Plath, obviously, is the revered poet and writer who killed herself in part because of the end of her relationship with Ted Hughes. And in that case, she's looking at Plath as an artist whose art and legacy was kind of altered or stained by violence, in this case, her own self. But she's so good. Detterer just makes so many brilliant points in that chapter, and in every chapter, frankly. And she looks at both sides of it. She looks at the case of Vladimir Nabokov, who, when Lolita came out, people thought he was a monster, because they have to be to write a book like that. And then it turns out, no, he's just a really brilliant guy that found this kernel of truth in this kind of different topic. So she looks at both sides of the issue. One of her through lines is the very sensible idea that we're all bound by our own perspectives. So who we are, how old we are, did we love this art for years before we discovered the information about people, why we do what we do, why we like what we like. It's an exceptional book, an amazing thought experiment. And Anna Byrne, our assistant director, she and I read it around the same time, and we talked about it constantly. We were upstairs together in our offices, and we just sit there. We're talking though. Sorry, Linda, we were talking for a while about this book on company time. Sorry, but it was about books. It's related. It's fine. It's work. But we talked about it a ton. And as I said before, I love books that make me think. She's great. Anything she's ever written is fantastic like that. What do we got? Oh, I honestly forgot. Again, I have carefully planned this out, and I still forget what I have. I'll put these down. Okay. This is a bit of psychological suspense. I guess it's my second thriller of the day. And again, I do not intend to find these. They just have their way of finding me. It is a book that features a librarian. I really don't look for them. I don't. They just find me. This is How Can I Help You by Laura Sims. She's a New Jersey-based author who's written several books of poetry, another book, novel named Looker, and yes, she is a part-time reference librarian. Huzzah. The story here is that a middle-aged woman named Margot shows up at a small-town library looking for work. She's fleeing her previous life because in that life, with a different name, she was a nurse who was frequently around during several premature deaths. She, like many of us, enjoys the quiet of the library and sees this new chapter in her life as a way not only to kind of be a calm place to rest, but hopefully a place that will kind of keep her urges at bay. She does blend in very quickly, though she does have some nasty, quiet thoughts to herself about some of the more difficult patrons. Haven't we all? But then a younger woman named Patricia enters the scene. This woman, she doesn't really want to work in the library. She considers herself a novelist in the making, but she hasn't had much success, so she's really taking the job just because she needs the work. But once she starts to like it, and since most librarians are very curious and like answering difficult questions, she starts to sense something off about Margot and feels compelled to kind of dig deeper and figure out this mysterious woman's secrets. I will admit, a thriller with this kind of cat and mouse game is not the newest idea in the world, but these characters, who have alternating first-person chapters, by the way, which is really nice, and it went back and forth on who I was kind of empathizing with, which had to be intentional because the way she does it is really well done. But the writing is just great. Obviously, I wouldn't be talking about it. And the whole library vibe was spot on, and I know I'm obviously biased here, but I've read so many books based in places, and you can tell that author has never been there or doesn't know anything about it because it just feels inauthentic or overdone. There's too many details because they're trying to fit in everything they've read online somewhere. But as she is a public librarian, it just works. It's a fun little book, dark in the right places, darkly funny in the right places. Just a fun little read. It's almost a little book. It's a little too big, but it's almost a little. My other debut novel. Some years I'm full of them. Some years I had 5 or 6 debut novels. I don't know why. This year I only have 2. But this is great. This is Central Places by Delia Kai. Kai is mainly a journalist born in Madison, Wisconsin. Her work has appeared in places like GQ and Catapult and BuzzFeed, but currently, and oddly enough, like our other debut novelists, because they both work at Vanity Fair, she's a senior correspondent in this case. Started writing this book about 5 years ago, and while it is not directly based on her life, her experiences growing up Asian American in the Midwest definitely inform the main character and her overall sense of place. This one is much lighter than the other books, and it's been described as a cross between like a classic coming-of-age novel, Hallmark rom-com, and like a Reese Witherspoon movie. Little Sweet Home Alabama thrown in the mix. So the story is very simple. Audrey Jo grew up in a small town in Illinois, but moved to New York City after high school, pretty excited to get away. Has a great job, great fiance, but she hasn't been home in a while and decides it's time to go back to her hometown for Christmas to introduce her white, not Asian, fiance to her parents. After that, the overarching plot isn't too surprising. Some things go well, some things don't. She sees old friends, sees an old boyfriend, which obviously stirs up some stuff. Basically just tries to figure out what kind of life she really wants to live. As I was reading it, I'm thinking this book sounds very different from the books I usually talk about. It is very simple, kind of an oft-told tale. But again, there's something about the personal truths you can feel seeping in from the author's own experience. And the undeniable, dramatic and emotional truths of a character returning home after what feels like a lifetime away because either they have or they think they have changed or are different people. And even though the plot may sound very familiar, it just feels very real. It's more literary fiction than romance, light where it needs to be, a little fraught where it needs to be. And Audrey is a much more complicated character than you usually find in a Reese Witherspoon movie. Not that I'm knocking Reese Witherspoon, I'd never do that. But it's just something with a fresh new voice where what happens next isn't always clean and tidy. And the issues Audrey has with her parents feel very real and very well explored. And the thing that makes fiction and novels so great is that even if you have read a story before, you've never read this author tell it with their style and their backstory and their motives. It's just part of what makes reading so much fun because, as I said before, there are deep truths in the simplest of plot lines. So it's a great little book. Great little book. Okay. I kind of mentioned it before. This is an amazing book that has annoyed me all year because this book came out last January. I listed it as a possible contender for the talk. And as the year went on, I thought it was safe. And then near the end of the year, it started showing up on all these best of lists. And I thought I should pull it. And I said, no, it's a fantastic book. I know more people who have thought about reading it than have read it. And so I figured it still deserved more praise. So this is Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, An Epic Journey from Slavery to Freedom by Hillian Wu. Wu is another very well-credentialed author. She's got a BA from Yale, PhD in English from Columbia. She wrote an amazing book in 2010 called The Great Divorce, which is about a woman in upstate New York in 1814, I think. And the efforts she made to regain her 3 children after her husband took them to join the Shaker community. It's one of the first kind of wife-based divorce cases. Brilliant. And that was a great story, but this one is absolutely stunning. This is the story of Ellen and William Craft, an enslaved couple from Georgia who set out in December of 1848 to make their way to the north. They took trains and ships and traveled completely in the open because Ellen could pass for white, yet she disguised herself as a wealthy disabled white man and had William at her side as her slave. The daring of this story, the reminder we all need from time to time of how truly horrible conditions and presumptions were for so many people in this country not very long ago, and the beautifully narrative and engaging writing, which reminded me a lot of Isabel Wilkerson's Warmth of Other Suns, which is so good, made this a terrific book. They eventually became somewhat famous for their story, which put them into even more danger because a lot of people were not really happy about former slaves becoming famous and being happy about it, as ridiculous as that sounds. And then in 1850, only a couple years later, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed, which, if you don't know, it required states to return all the slaves to their owners, even if they were living in a free state. So then they had to run again. It is a truly amazing story, brilliantly told and researched, so much fascinating information about the time period and the abolitionist movement, and Frederick Douglass and William Mills Brown, and I've always believed we learn a lot more from a time period, about a time period or any historical issue by looking at smaller, more personal stories, rather than this macro view that always misses the details that really tell us what was actually going on. You may have already heard about it, but the cert numbers were low. I'd already read it, I'd already written it out. I was done, I'm doing it. So it's a very powerful story. I can't believe, it's one of those stories that you can never believe why is it getting told now? How did it take this long for someone to tell the story? So it's great. All right, only 2 left. I'm moving quick today. What time is it? Oh, no, moving quick. I'm just yakking on like always, okay. I have always been, will always be a huge fan of movies, and since I'm a massive reader, I'm a huge fan of books about movies. I've had a few books like this in my talk over the years. Sometimes it's a deep dive into one film or with an era or a style. This one is closer to a biography, and yet one of the reasons it's so good is that it's not exactly a biography of a person, but more of a combined biography of a person and an idea, written by perhaps the only man who could have pulled it off. This is Path to Paradise, or The Path to Paradise, a Francis Ford Coppola story by Sam Wasson. Sam is one of the best writers to have ever written about the arts, in my opinion, having written, among others, an unbelievable book about Bob Fosse. It's one of my favorite books of all time. An amazing book on the making of Chinatown called The Big Goodbye that was on my list a couple years ago. And he's just a perfect combination of a brilliant writer and researcher, truly original thinker in the way he kind of structures and designs his books. This book traces the broad arc of Coppola's career, but it does so through the utopian idea of American Zoetrope, which was the company and the environment and the vision that Coppola had to leave the traditional Hollywood studio system and make something completely new. And when I say new, I mean like completely from scratch. If you had no experience in anything, but you had an idea, you were hired. He listened to everybody, talked to everybody, considered everything, wanted to try everything. And the beauty and the madness of this quest for true creative freedom is what makes the book so compelling. And Watson's writing is so vivid and so engaging that you feel like you're, kind of riding every up and down of this journey with them, and there are many. The book opens during a very Zoetrope-like production for Apocalypse Now and moves through what was meant to be the ultimate Zoetrope experience, which was a sensory overload, which was his musical One from the Heart, which most of you probably haven't seen. It's like everybody, see, if you look at his movies, you've seen all these and then everybody drops off right before that, which is fascinating because not only is Apocalypse Now and One from the Heart one of the most fascinating back-to-back productions in film history ever for one person to do this and then this. I thought I knew a lot about him, and this was such a challenging, stressful period for him. And I learned so many new things from this book, not just from the details he has, but through mood he creates, I guess. He had access to all of Coppola's archives, spent countless hours talking to Coppola himself, talked to so many people and filmmakers who were involved in American Zoetrope, that he crafted just this fascinating book at one of our greatest filmmakers, who is actually making a comeback right now. He's got a new movie coming out, which is excellent. I love reading about film and music and art because unlike a book about some piece of history that you can never actually experience, you can read about something and then go view it, listen to it, see it exactly as it was. I love doing that. And if you like this one, right, we have so many great books on film and music upstairs, personally curated by me. And Sam Watson, you can never ever go wrong with anything he's written. He's an unbelievably great writer. So good. Okay. Last book of the year. I love doing this to you. So, if you heard me before, I do like a little bit of kind of atmospheric. It's not horror. I can't say that word. It's not horror, but it's this atmospheric kind of dark thing that is very, very hard to convey on paper. It's very easy to do on screen, very hard to do well on paper. One of the most famous, certainly influential horror novels. Why can't I say that word? There's a lot. I can't say that word. One of the most influential horror novels of all time is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I say influential because it has spawned several film versions that hold pretty close to the book, many, many, many novels that follow the Hill House concept. There was a Netflix series in 2018, it's one of the best I've ever seen. But after 64 years, we finally have the first authorized novel to revisit Hill House and all of its supernatural menace. And this is A Haunting on the Hill by Elizabeth Hand, who's written lots of books, including Honolulu Road, which was on last year's talk. Personally, this is one where I sneak in a little bit my list, but it wasn't all the top 10 lists. I was so excited about this book because, I was excited and nervous, because curious how the quality of this story would relate to the original. The styles are obviously quite different because Jackson's book came out in 1959. But reading this book, it felt to me as if Hill House were a real place that Hand had visited and walked the halls to make this story feel so real and accurate, which was a creepy thought too, to think that it is a real place, because I have thought that in my life. I've read the book many times. The plot is simple enough. We have a playwright named Holly Sherwin, who had some success earlier in her career, but it was derailed by an unfortunate incident. She has yet to regain the promise that she and others felt she had. She's been working on a play about witches for a few years, and she and her partner Lisa, who has written some haunting songs for the play, find their way to renting Hill House as a remote place to workshop the play with two other people. Two quick things. In the original novel, Hill House does not have a location. It's just wherever it is. Hand is placed within a couple hours of New York City, which feels right. It feels very kind of leather stocking tails, kind of Ichabod Crane kind of. I know where it is in my brain. It also makes perfect sense how they find the house in the first place, meaning if you've ever seen a horror movie or read a horror book, this is not one of those ridiculous stories where a car of college kids show up and they just happen to show up at the house of this crazy person. It feels like kind of the tendrils of the house and reaching out for them all along. It's so good. So as these people are in this house working on this play, the house begins to work on them. And while Jackson's original magic is certainly something that is special, this is a fantastic extension of the world that she created. And it's the best kind of horror novel because it's not bloody gory horror. It's just there's just something wrong with the house. It's so literary horror is so good, and it's so superior to cinematic horror because it's so easy. You can feel me geeking out right now as I start talking. It's so easy to create in movies like what they call the jump scare, like some big thing. And it's so hard on paper to create just a sense of other. It takes a real patient case. Otherwise, you can overwrite it really easy. It's so hard. It takes a really patient, talented author. It's just a fun way to let your imagination run wild for a bit. I thought about it a lot. I don't think you have to read the original Shirley Jackson book to fully enjoy this. I would recommend it. So it's 2 recommendations for the price of 1. And again, if you're saying to yourself, horror is not my thing, I'm never gonna read, it's not bloody murder horror. It's just this quiet, beautiful tension that is truly hard to do. So if you have any inclination at all, read this and read Shirley Jackson too, because she's great.
Can you go to sleep after?
Can you go to sleep? Yes, you can, because the house is also so distinct. I know many people who, yes, we have that vibe. The house is so distinct that it's this large kind of, I don't know, hang on, some of you may live in large, massive houses. I don't. So if you have this house, lots of hallways. I don't know. But yes, you can go to sleep.
Very important.
I can go to sleep. It is very important. Or just read it when the light's out. Don't read it at night. It's not that kind of like. It's not that kind of thing. As I say that, I'm going to get an ugly email from someone in like 2 months blaming me for causing them distress. So that is my last book. I really, really, really do appreciate the fact that anybody comes to spend any time listening to me talk over here. So I know there are lots of titles out there and new things to read, so I really take this responsibility very seriously. I've said it before, I say it even when my boss isn't in the room, I absolutely love my job. I love that I get to do this every year. It's so much fun to find the books and figure them all out. Any of the books you want, you can take home today. Just check them out as you go. And hopefully you have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next week.